Remember, remember, the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason and plot. I see no reason why gunpowder and treason should ever be forgot. Picture it if you can. It's the 5th of November, 1605, and you find yourself in the dark, damp basement of the Houses of Parliament. In front of you are 36 barrels of gunpowder, more than enough to destroy the building twice over. You see a man, tall and strong, with a reddish-brown beard, inspect the barrels, checking for any faults. He awaits the arrival of Parliament and the King. James I, a symbol of British Protestantism, is the primary target, and killing him will see the potential return of Catholicism to the United Kingdom. But will the plot succeed? Buckle up, as I'm going to introduce you to the explosive tale of the Gunpowder Plot. Britain in the Stuart era was not at all peaceful. Protestants and Catholics in England had developed a fierce rivalry, with both sides attempting to influence who the next monarch would be, as it would protect one denomination, yet diminish the other. Years ago, in 1603, Elizabeth I, a strong opponent of foreign Catholicism, died with no heir. To replace her, they decided that King James of Scotland would become the monarch. Initially, the Catholics in Britain were excited. James's mother was Mary, Queen of Scots, and Mary was a staunch Catholic, meaning that he might be sympathetic to them, perhaps even ending persecution altogether. This would not be the case. Many members of the House of Commons were vehement Protestants, and any sort of pro-Catholic behaviour would appall them. Not only this, but minor plots against the king's life by Catholics ruined all of his sympathetic views for them. None of these plots were successful, the Catholics fearing that they would be pushed aside and expelled forever. Despite their quantity, every single one failed, and it seems like Protestantism was here to stay. They were desperate, and one man in particular had an idea, an explosive one, introducing Robert Catesby, a charismatic and friendly gentleman who was a passionate defender of Catholicism. Catesby was a very talented person. He could network and communicate extraordinarily well, making connections with people from interesting walks of life. He disliked the king and knew he had to get rid of him. This wouldn't be his first time either. A few years prior, in 1601, Elizabeth I was on her last legs, and it was inevitable that she would die without an heir. Two of her counsellors, Robert Cecil and the Earl of Essex, developed a fierce rivalry, both trying to gain as much power over the other as possible. On one occasion, Essex was sent to Ireland to put down a rebellion, but he made peace with the rebels against the Queen's wishes. He was cast out and ruined, his long career put to an end. But Essex was not one to cede without resistance. He decided to gather his diverse mix of supporters and planned on removing all of Cecil's influence in Parliament altogether. One of his supporters was Robert Catesby. The plan didn't gain much traction, as the council had heard about the plot and promised to pardon the plotters if they gave up immediately. They did just that. However, Essex was sentenced to death and beheaded shortly after, and although spared, Catesby forfeited his estate to the Queen, losing his fortune in the process. 2 years later, in 1603, a new monarch was on the throne, but Catesby was still far from happy and was pining for a change. He began his plot with co-conspirator Thomas Percy and wrote to his cousin Robert Winter to join him in London. Now, in 1604, after recruiting another member, John Wright, Winter was sent to Flanders to gain the assistance of Juan de Velasco, a man who was attempting to achieve peace between England and Spain. Velasco gave nothing but vague promises. Winter, however, returned with a new accomplice. This was none other than Guy Fawkes, a man renowned for his risk-taking and adventurous exploits. Soon the five men took communion and were initiated into the plot. Later on, more members of the plot were initiated. Winter's brother Thomas, John Grant, Ambrose Rockwood, Robert Keyes, Sir Everard Digby, Catesby's cousin Francis Tresham and Catesby's servant Thomas Bates. On May 24th, a building next to the House of Lords was rented under Percy's name. In the house's cellar, a mine was planted. They began digging, but realised that a cellar directly underneath Parliament was for sale, so they decided to rent that instead. Eventually in May 1605, the gunpowder was bought and planted successfully. All they had to do now was wait, and England would be theirs. The group separated, each of them contacting their allies for the day of the plot. All was well. After years of planning, it seemed as if the plan would be easier than expected. After all, no information leaked out of their tight, dogmatic network. Planter Francis Tresham's cousin, Lord Monteagle, was viewed favourably by the plotters despite his allegiance to King James. On the 26th of October, he was sent an anonymous letter. An extract of it reads, "I have care of your preservation, therefore I would advise you as tender as your life to devise some shift to excuse your attendance at this Parliament, for God and man have concurred to punish the wickedness of this time." Monteagle found the letter suspicious and headed to Westminster to present the letter to the ministers, who agreed that Parliament and its surroundings should be thoroughly searched before it opened, just as a safe precaution. Now, the rumours trickled back down to the plotters, many of which were having doubts about its success. Catesby, however, was relentless, and he wouldn't give up. Not now, not ever. He instructed Fawkes to guard the cellar until it was time for the opening of Parliament. Unfortunately for him, even the king himself had heard of the plot, and instructed his subordinates to search the cellar. On the night of November 4th, Fawkes was watching steadily, waiting for the opportunity to forever change the history of Britain. He waited and waited. Soon the night would be over and the Lords would fill the benches of Parliament. All of a sudden, a magistrate and his men burst into the cellar, catching Fawkes red-handed, and arrested him immediately. After his arrest, the plotters split up and scattered, eventually meeting up in Warwickshire. A day after the plot, Fawkes was imprisoned, but refused to give the names of the conspirators. Persuasion alone would not make him confess. They decided to bring out the rack. For those of you that are unaware, the rack is almost synonymous with the Gunpowder Plot. Imagine a rectangular frame raised from the ground with rollers at both ends. The victim's ankles and wrists are attached to each roller, where they would be pulled away until there is nothing to pull away from. Fawkes was tortured on the rack repeatedly for days until he eventually signed a confession, his signature crooked and warped from his wrists being stretched beyond discomfort. Now the rest of the plotters headed for Holbeach House in Staffordshire, armed and ready to defend themselves. Soon the sheriff and his men began a shootout, the plotters within the house desperate to get away, for they knew that the fate that would await them if captured would be severe. In the ensuing battle, Catesby, Percy and Wright were all killed, yet Winters and Rockwood were captured. As expected, all captured plotters were rounded up and executed, their bodies being made examples of what happens if you defy the authority of the king. That is the story of the Gunpowder Plot, a daring plan that went horribly wrong. To this day, the British monarchy remains Protestant, but Catholics are no longer persecuted. Today, the 5th of November is celebrated with fireworks and bonfires, commemorating the failure of the plotters. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe if you would like to stay updated with my new videos.